Friends, good evening. I'd like to just ask those of you that are sitting high up in the bleachers, if you wouldn't mind coming down. It just will make a more connected experience for us tonight. We seem to have a fair number of students that are under the weather. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for being respectful with the mask request. I'm going to ask you tonight also, just out of the courtesy of, for our speaker, our guest speaker, and just for our attention, that there'll be a couple of places tonight where we will ask for your interactive participation. We're trying to be responsive to your interests in the class of trying to make it more interactive. So tonight will be a little bit different. We will do a couple things that will require your computer. But I would really appreciate it that when we're not doing those, that you have your computer closed and that you're participating. Because the group's a little bit smaller tonight, we're going to make it even a little more interactive, the class, and see how that goes. So that's just following up on some of your feedback that you gave us at the mid-course evaluation. So thank you for that. Welcome again back to Edible Education after hopefully an energizing, safe, and enjoyable spring break. We have now survived the flood of 2022. We're back here. They've done a miraculous job cleaning this all up for us, so we're back live and in person. I did get really good feedback from Bentley Hall, our guest who you met online from Good Eggs. He was just really appreciative of the interactivity with you online, and he wrote me a note saying that he was, really appreciated how engaged the class was, and that he was going to pick up some of the approaches that we used with interactivity online with all of his team meetings now. So I thought that was kind of nice. Tonight we have a special guest named Jammet. Nick is one of the co-founders, one of the trio of co-founders of Sweetgreen. He's got a remarkable 15-year journey he's going to share with you as an entrepreneur and now a leader of a public company. Nick was here, we were just talking about 5 years ago when the Berkeley Shattuck Avenue store just opened. And I remember him very generously giving everybody a coupon so they could go try that. That was back in the day when that was still a little bit of a novel. Even though you were 10 years old, it was still novel to this area. Now, Sweetgreen is really a market leader in many areas of innovation, and really looking forward to having him talk about how he and his partners and colleagues have reimagined eating out and every aspect of it, from the customer's experience to the supply chain to just the whole workings of the way a restaurant works in the year 2022. So we'll have Nick in just a few minutes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the final project. You're coming up on an opportunity to express your own kind of change maker's strategic plan. Hopefully there's some clarity starting to develop for you. We're going to give you a chance we're going to do this today a little bit differently. We're going to take a break after Nick talks for like 10 minutes. So you can stretch, use the restroom. But what we'd also like you to do during that 10 minutes is find a friend, colleague, partner in the class and share with them your initial ideas about what you're going to do your paper about. And the idea is to give you an opportunity to get feedback and ask each other sort of clarifying questions or brainstorm a little bit. And then we're going to do that again next week. But next week, you're going to come to class with a much more refined, almost like a 30-second elevator pitch to describe your project. Does that make sense? Is that okay? And Pooja, what I would love to do is, can we do this word cloud? So maybe now take out your computer. And what I'd love for you to do is go to Mentimeter and use the code, I can't read it. 5336-8757, menti.com, and put in the topic of your paper. Like it doesn't have to be a lot of words, but if it's like food access, or what problem are you going to solve? What area of food are you going to, regenerative agriculture, what. This will give you a little bit of a feel for the distribution of topics and interests in the class. Okay, great. Food waste, food equity, ethical grocery shopping, food banks as a Band-Aid, community gardens. I like that one. I'm happy to be an expert witness on that one. Living wages, circular food system. Okay, good. Maybe when you're done with this, we're able to make a copy of this, right, and share it. We'll put this on B courses for you. You can also use the discussion boards to find the others. You might find, since there seems to be a lot of diversity in the topics, which is great. But you may also find one another and share, ideas and insights. So the paper, what we're really looking for you is to develop a hypothesis or a thesis about what you want to change, describing the problem. And then we want you to bring your kind of full self to answering the call. So what would you do? It could be, well, I want to join this organization, or an organization like this that does such and such and such and such because. So it could be I want to join an organization. It could be I want to start something, right? I want to do some kind of research. But the key for the paper is that it's action-oriented. And it should articulate, kind of your mission and your values, and it should it should draw on the readings and the experiences that you've had with our guest speakers and their modalities of change making. You might say, well, I want to innovate in public policy, or I want to innovate in research tools to measure the carbon footprint of certain meals, or I want to work with Sweetgreen and help them, create less waste in their system, whatever it is. But you're going to work on articulating this kind of personal mission, okay? It should be fun. This should be a fun exercise for you, or more than an exercise. It's true that some people who have written this, use this opportunity to do this assignment, have actually kind of manifested their next step in their life or their dream job. I've seen it happen. So it's a great opportunity for you to articulate your own purpose and that creative tension between the vision of where you want to go and the world you want to create to live in, and where we are now and the pathways to get there. So you can draw on the papers that we've read about entrepreneurial mindsets, about systems thinking, and also quote, if you want to go back, of course, you can look at any of the videos of the classes and reference some of the things the speaker said, to refer to those. Those kinds of things get lots of attention and points when they're graded, in case that's important to you. So it's weaving together this learning that you've had during the semester and then bringing it forward, in the paper. Okay?
Well, is it okay if I jump to that big piece now?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so I was going to do this at the end, but instead I'll slot this in now just for continuity's sake. So wanted to highlight a couple of the questions that we've gotten through office hours and email and whatnot. So just wanted, so Will just touched on this a little bit, but the goal is to really understand how you can affect change within an area that you're passionate about. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that you're not looking for, or we're not looking for you to say like a specific phrase that's the solution and then you get full credit. Like it's really about a potential solution. Like none of these problems have a clear answer. And so don't get caught up in trying to be like, is this the absolute best solution or not? It's like, where can you use your skill set and your background to affect change in the leverage points that you've identified? We also had some questions about mission versus vision, and the distinction that I draw there is that mission is kind of what your personal goal in affecting change is, and the vision is how do you see the world looking after your mission comes true or after you've done the action that you're writing about. Also had a couple questions about if what you put in the discussion board has to be exactly the same as your final paper, and the answer is a resounding no. We're going to have speakers over the next couple of weeks that might influence what you want to write about or add some nuance to your topic, so these can definitely shift. You're not bound in any way to what you wrote about in your discussion board. We just want to get you thinking about what's an area that you want to focus on. And then, yeah, the best papers will also think about what are potential issues with your solution. So you definitely, like one of the biggest things that we've talked about with our speakers are some of the trade-offs and some of the exchanges that you make when proposing one idea over another. And so we're looking for that level of thinking, of understanding, okay, this idea has all of these merits, but we need to watch out for these potential downsides or potential unintended consequences that might come along with it as well. So,
really helpful. So systems, leverage points, trade-offs, unintended consequences. Great. Thank you, Pooja. All right. Why don't you go back to the very beginning slides, because I just want to show, it's been really a remarkable week in the garden. You know, I like to share the garden. A couple of you have made the journey to get your hands dirty and come see what's happening. But one of the things that I am always struck with, particularly this time of year, is the awareness that that living things do not grow in a linear manner. They grow exponentially at certain times. And so they rest and sleep. So during this winter, even though we have a light winter here in California, you have this sort of sleeping garden. And then all of a sudden, I went away for just a couple days, and I came home to that this morning. And it's like a symphony of irises. It's pretty extraordinary. How about the next one? Where's this? I just wanted to show you a couple things that are happening here. The Japanese maples are leafing out, and this is just also a remarkable time because the color is so vibrant, and the color sort of relaxes into a deeper, more monochromatic hue. But like at this moment, there's just so much variation in the leaves. It's pretty spectacular. And then more irises. And the other thing about gardens is that they are fleeting. You know, these flowers will only look like this for a day or two out of 365. So again, it's sort of a reminder of the fleeting and ephemeral nature of the garden and of change, and you know, just appreciating the moment. I mean, it's easy to show off the big bloom, but when you start to tend a garden more conscientiously, you begin to appreciate all aspects of this cycle. And you know, once I will go prune these after they bloom, I'll take those stalks and I'll put them back in the compost pile. And then in a year or two, I'll be using that compost to feed the flowers again so that they can put on this, you know, remarkable spring show. So now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to our guest speaker tonight, Nick Jammet. He's a loyal dedicated supporter to this class. He's one of the true food systems change makers that I know. I delight in his imagination, his creativity, his leadership, and his humility. I'm really grateful that he took the time to fly up to be with us tonight. So without further ado, please welcome Nick Jammet from Sweetgreen. There he is. Oh, and you have some slides in there too, and you can use this.
Just some background photos, yeah.
Great.
All right, hello everyone. So who here has been to Sweetgreen before? Who here has never been to Sweetgreen before? All right, we got to change that. But thank you for having me here today. You know, Sweetgreen was a business that I started 15 years ago with my two best friends in college. And so we were sitting in a seat very similar to you, if you're undergrad. And we were seniors at Georgetown in 2006, and we were just sick of having this conversation about food, about our meals. We didn't understand why the food options that we had every day made us feel the way we felt. And you know, we were sick of eating things that didn't make us feel good. And we'd go to the cafeteria and didn't enjoy the food. We'd go to the famous college hangout places, the sandwich spot, the burger spot, and we just believed there had to be a different way. And as we started to understand and just research the food system a bit more, we realized it wasn't just a problem at Georgetown. And we honestly started Sweetgreen to solve a problem for ourselves, a problem we had in our life. And so it was a very personal problem we were solving. And the more we understood the fast food landscape, we realized that all the food that people craved the most, that was the most accessible, that was the coolest brands, were all the least healthy food. And we wanted to change that. We didn't understand why there couldn't be an option that did all those things, but with food that was good for you. So, to put it simply, we looked at healthy food and found that it had a branding problem, a taste problem, and an access problem. And so we started writing our business plan. The three of us actually all took an entrepreneurship class at Georgetown and wrote this business plan and raised $350,000 our senior year and opened our first Sweetgreen in a tiny little, I have a photo of it. Okay. Well, opened our first restaurant in a tiny little 560 square foot former very famous burger hut in DC called the Little Tavern. And it was landmarked and we couldn't touch any of it. It looked like this already. But within that 560 square feet, Sweetgreen was born. And the idea was really simple, was to provide really clean food that was delicious, where people could trust the food, how it was sourced, how it was prepared, and ultimately still be satiated and have the food be craveable, but give people optionality with food that they could eat every day that fit their life. And so Sweetgreen was born with salads and frozen yogurt. I show this photo because the Sweetgreen that is here off campus on Shattuck, there's a similar store we opened in the famed Oscar's Burger Shack, if any of you know the place that was there before. It was a burger place that had been there for decades. But again, if you also rewind back 15 years to the world, the conversation on food was really starting to evolve to a different place. And we felt this kind of opening where people's relationship with food was starting to change, or people were starting to learn more. It was around the time of, a bunch of documentaries and books, Michael Pollan's books, and that were starting to shed light on our food system and ultimately connect the dots between people's relationship with food and their health. And so it was a really exciting time and to start a business like Sweetgreen. We often say, right place, right time. We were in DC in 2007, which was a really exciting time, especially in 2008 in DC. There was a lot of energy around just growth in that city and also more broadly around food. And you started to see more people turn to food, more people invest in food, and more people think about the food they were eating. So we opened our first one in 2007 and have been growing since then. And today we're at 158 restaurants in 15 states, and we're opening on average one new Sweetgreen per week. And it's been really exciting and really fulfilling to see where the conversation on food has gone. And you're all sitting here in a class studying this, and even I think back to when we started this at Georgetown. There wasn't really any classes on food or entrepreneurship, and today there's multiple paths there. So from an early age, people are talking about food more, and you even think about people's relationship with food, what they eat every day, and how much they think about it, and it has completely changed. And again, we're still very early in that journey, and so even though 158 sounds like a lot, there are 3,000 Chipotles and tens of thousands of McDonald's, and our goal is to help redefine fast food, to really help think about this next generation of food and consumers and their relationship with that food. And so, and back to the problem statement for us, it was about creating access, so opening restaurants and creating different channels, whether digital, delivery, some of the other channels we've created, to just remove as much friction from this type of food as possible. When we started Sweetgreen, it was just really hard to find healthy food. Even if it tasted good and you wanted to eat, it was just really hard to find. So a big guiding light for how we've grown Sweetgreen and thought about it has been around convenience and friction, really thinking about making it easier to eat this kind of food. And friction, exists in many different ways, from how far it is to you, to price, to taste, to all the points that stop people from eating healthy food. So we've been very intentional and on this mission to just remove as much friction between people and healthy food as possible. And then, the second part of that is really trying to create a brand that talks about food differently and ultimately engages consumers in their food choices in a different way. And so, ultimately we looked at all the greatest brands in food, and they were at least healthy food. But we also started to broaden outside of the food world and just look at, all the brands we loved the most, whether it's Nike or Lululemon or, brands that were just brilliant at creating products that people loved and changed their life. And so we tried to think about creating a brand that could really just create a different connection with a customer, and think about the different tools that, whether it was the biggest fast food or food products brands had used in the past, just brilliant marketing tactics, and try to apply as many of those as possible as we could to this type of food. And so over the years, we've been, probably one of the things we've done, invested the most in, is really in the brand and the conversation around food. And so much of that starts with just everything from design to transparency and traceability, and sharing that information around our food and our supply chain with our customers and our guests. And it's manifested in many different ways. So for years in DC, we had what was one of the biggest music and food festivals on the East Coast, where we would take over a venue called Merriweather Post Pavilion and just change out all the concessions to be, to bring our farmers and other like-minded chefs and food partners, removing the soda, removing Heinz ketchup from the pump stations, and just replacing it with more thoughtful and natural brands, and showing people that, even a moment like a music festival could also be a day where you don't make the poorest food choices. But in general, we've tried to build a brand that stands for something more than just the transaction. And so over the years, we've invested a lot in lifting the curtain between consumers and their food. When we opened our fourth restaurant in 2009 in DC, we had this crazy idea at the time, which was we put a chalkboard up and listed all of our ingredients and where they came from, what farm they came from. And at the time, I remember people, everyone from our investors to customers were kind of like, I don't think people need to know that in fast food. I don't think people want to know that. And for us, we wanted to create a different type of, two things. A, we wanted to create a different type of relationship with customers that we felt they needed this information. But secondly, we were putting all this energy into sourcing from some of the greatest growers and farmers and partners, and we were proud of it, and we wanted to show that. I remember thinking we would go to the farmer's market and buy some of the same produce that, the fine dining restaurants were buying, and charging, $100, $200 a meal, and we were charging at the time $10 for a bowl. And so for us, it was also just wanting to brag about the ingredients. And so much of our product, the majority of our product starts in the field and with our farmers. And we say the farmers are kind of like our chefs. A lot of the flavor is created by them. So very early on, we, because we were students that had never run restaurants before, never built a restaurant, we tried to really take a first principles approach and build something that we wanted, but not just revert to the mean of, building a restaurant the way it should be built, and thinking everything from the supply chain to the economic model to the brand, to how we talked about food. We really wanted to build something different. So early on, we realized that if we wanted to create a brand and a product and a business that could change food, we couldn't just look like everyone else. And as we've scaled and evolved, it's been an interesting journey, because there are parts of building a company, whether it's how you hire your team or how you think about scaling supply chains, or things like food safety or operations or HR that you have to learn from other companies at scale. But there's so many parts of our business that we constantly ask, well, why does it have to be done like that? Why can't you do it like this? Why can't you try it like this? And over the years, that approach has caused us to fail many times and mess up a lot of stuff. But when it works and when you figure out a new way to think about something, a new way to connect the dots, it really can be transformative in the business. I talk about investing in our supply chain and brand. The other area that we've probably invested the most in is technology. So very early on, as we thought about creating, the fast food restaurant of the future, we knew that how customers and guests defined convenience was changing, and we saw it changing so rapidly. When we opened our first restaurant in 2007, customers would say, "Oh wow, this is so convenient. I can walk downstairs from my office and walk 5 blocks away and wait in line for 10 minutes and have this healthy meal. How convenient." Fast forward 5 years, we're like, I have to walk outside, walk 5 blocks away, and then wait in line for 10 minutes? That's not convenient. So, our guests' perception of convenience was changing, and again, that friction was evolving. And so we started to invest heavily in our digital channels and really think about how customers could access our food in a much easier way. So whether it was ordering ahead, pickup, delivery, we've recently, in the last few years, heavily invested in a channel called Outpost, which is kind of like B2B Amazon lockers for our food. And today we have, pre-COVID, we had 1,000 of them live around the country. Today we're back up to around 500. But again, it's just creating as many channels for customers to be able to interact with this food and just make it the easiest food. Just as easy as any typical fast food option when you're thinking about where to eat. And so we've invested heavily in technology, and today in the industry we're probably one of the most digitally engaged brands in terms of our actual transactions. So the majority of our transactions are digital. That means customers interacting on our platforms, on our apps, ordering ahead for pickup or delivery or Outpost, and it just gives us a much more powerful understanding of who our customer is and what they want and how they transact, and allows us to really thoughtfully invest in the right parts of our business and make the right decisions, whether it's where to open restaurants or how to evolve our menu. And really any decision we make can be pretty data-driven with that digital connection we have with our customer. And it allows us ultimately just to create a better experience for them. And a year ago, our business changed quite a bit. We went public in November, and after 14 years of building Sweetgreen, we felt like it was the right moment for us to finally access more capital and really scale Sweetgreen. But for us, there was a heavy intention and thought around not changing the way we make decisions and really thinking about the long term. When we started Sweetgreen 15 years ago, we wanted to build a business that could stand for more and affect and evolve the food system, but we wanted to build something that could truly be long term, a business and a brand that could be generational, that could be around for 100+ years. So whenever we're making decisions or making investments or even deciding who we raise money from or who we partner with or how we think about building our restaurants, we try to always maintain a really long-term focus. And it's one of our core values, but it really does change when you think about the length of time that you're optimizing for a decision. It will change your decision and ultimately the outcomes. So for us, it's, the three of us spend a lot of time thinking about that. So ultimately we're here today in 2022 and now a public company and starting to scale pretty rapidly, and really excited to be bringing this type of food to pretty much every region in the country. Excited to help redefine fast food.
Great intro. Let me see. Is this working? This is working. Okay, great. Thank you for that great intro. What were you studying in college when you were at Georgetown? What was your major?
I was studying entrepreneur. I was in undergrad business school studying entrepreneurship and French.
Good combo.
Yeah.
Since you could pronounce the word properly.
Yes.
Yes. Nobody got that joke, but that's okay. Do you have another slide that you wanted to show, or is that for later? Is this the before and after?
Slide.
Pooja, slide, please.
I think there's one more photo.
I just thought while we have it, we might as well.
Oh yeah, so this was a slide that I felt made sense to share here in this community. So this is a farm called Frog Hollow Farms, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So as we have scaled our supply chain and our menu, One of my biggest fears over the years at Sweetgreen as we've scaled is if you look at 95+% of restaurants, as they scale, their food gets shittier. They make all those, they compromise, you cut it a little bit each day, each week, each month, and all of a sudden you wake up 5 years later and your food is radically much shittier. And so we've been very intentional about not just thinking about the quality of our food when it's in our restaurant, but really a heavy focus and investment on scaling our supply chain with these growers, farmers, and food producers. And so, a really exciting proof point is this last year, we have a seasonal menu that changes 5 times per year and celebrates regionality and seasonality. So really buying from some of the greatest growers that, follow regenerative practices and buying things at peak season and then celebrating that to our customers. So, last year at 150 restaurants, when we had our fruit and cheese salad that is kind of a summer staple of ours, and it changes regionally, and the fruit varies by region, and the cheese has changed from some really great cheese partners that we source from. But we, for our whole West Coast, for half the fleet almost, we were buying from Frogs Hollow Farms. And so it was really exciting for us to be able to work with someone like Frog Hollow Farms, but then to be able to scale with them. And the thing that's different about our supply chain is, we have a direct relationship with every grower, farmer, and food partner. And then we go to our distributors and say, hey, will you move these boxes around? But the relationship is direct with us, and we focus on long-term relationships with these growers. We're able to forecast our business a year out, at least, if not more, so we can go to them and say, hey, in 2022 and 2023, this is what we think we're going to need, and this is when. Can you grow it for us? What would you like to be growing? What should we buy from you? Actually, today is the last day of our winter menu that has miso roasted root veg, and that root veg mixture is different in every region, but within it we find things like sunchokes and parsnips and things that I'm sure it would be really hard to find on any other fast food menu. And that didn't come from a consumer insight that said, customers will buy a lot of sunchokes, put it on your menu. There's other things we could sell that we'd probably sell a lot more of. But our farmers told us, we rotate these, and especially in the Northeast and in different parts of the country, we're growing a bunch of sunchokes. It's in our rotation for certain reasons around soil health, and we wish people would buy more of this. So we said, we'll buy it, we'll make it delicious, and we'll market it, and we'll tell this story to our customers. And it's been one of the best-selling bowls on our menu every year for the last 3 years. So again, it's this push and pull, a balance of art and science, but this slide was just to really, again, just brag about this amazing partner that we work with, and really excited that we have the privilege of serving their peaches on our menu, and that we got to do it at our scale last year.
One of my favorite innovations that you embarked on a couple of years ago was when you partnered with Row 7 Seeds and Dan Barber, and you introduced this new squash that was bred just for flavor, and it was really bold, wonderfully colorful product introduction. It was kind of a breakthrough, and from a strategic. Do you know who Dan Barber is? Anybody? Yes, Dan has come to the class, and there's a great video of him. He's he's the author of a book called The Third Plate, which highly recommended, has changed people's lives in the same way that Michael Pollan's. But Dan is a very innovative chef that really believes that the flavor is created in the ground, in the farm, in the seed. And he became, beyond being a chef, he became an entrepreneur, and he started a seed company called Row 7, working with some very talented seed breeders, primarily one at Cornell. And he was wondering, why does this squash taste terrible? And because it was bred for, to shelf life and for cosmetic stability. Yeah. And so it looked good in a grocery store, had a nice, orange flavor, orange look, but it didn't taste good. So anyway, Nick, you tell the rest of the story, because you found this beautiful kogi nut.
Yes, the Robbins kogi nut squash. So I would say, again, just a second plug for that book, that probably is the top of the list of books that have changed the way I think about food and that have affected Sweetgreen and the way we think about food. And Dan and his brother David Barber, who run Blue Hill and Stone Barns, have been two of the earliest supporters and just friends of Sweetgreen, and we've done a few collaborations with him. Actually, 6 years ago, I saw the word food waste up there a bunch in the cloud. We did a food waste collaboration with Dan Barber when he was on his Big Wasted tour, and he came into our restaurants and studied our supply chain and helped us just rethink so many of our ingredients. So, using the anchovy oil from the cans to roast vegetables, using the kale stems chopped up, and then obviously rethinking waste upstream into the supply chain. So buying broccoli leaf from our broccoli farmer. And so again, when we came up this wasted salad and sold it. And again, it did very well. And we told this amazing story around food waste. And that was fun. But, a few years later, we had the opportunity to work with him on this squash project. And he had just started row 7 and was breeding a bunch of seeds for flavor. And really, ultimately, when you look at how 99% of seeds are bred out there and sold, it's for, color, size, yield, durability, how it travels, but not flavor. And so he wanted to flip that and spent years breeding. I think he started with 6 or 7 seeds. And before he'd even launched, I said, okay, we'll buy 100,000 seeds of the Kogi nut squash, and we will grow it. We grew it in six farms around the country, 23 acres, of some amazing farmers like Alex Weiser in LA, and some really famed farmers. And it sounds like a great idea on paper, and I feel bad for our supply chain team. It's kind of a horrible idea because no one had ever grown that at scale, so we didn't even know if it would come out of the ground. And we made we just kind of said, like, whatever, let's figure it out and let's do it because it's, the results could be so cool. And so we did it, came out of the ground, they cured, and they were delicious. And we had this whole campaign around, bread for flavor, and, we put a billboard in Times Square of Dan with a squash. And again, the idea of treating this vegetable, this squash, the same way Nike would drop their newest shoe from Virgil. The idea was trying to take consumer products and apply the same excitement and marketing and design that you would with those items and drop a vegetable the same way. And again, it sold incredibly well too. So again, it's this idea of being able to do right by the farmer, the food system, our customer, and our business.
I hope you're starting to think of some questions for Nick. And there's a microphone up here, and there's a microphone on here. And the reason we like you to come to the microphone is because, as you know, this is captured on video and is also being live streamed on YouTube. So talk about a little, you mentioned lots of failures. Do you mind delving into a few of those and kind of what you learned and how you learn? I mean, in my kind of entrepreneurial career, we've always tried to foster a culture of, mistakes are great as long as they only happen once. Mm-hmm. So it's like a lot of fast learning and a lot of reflection, which we focused on early in this class, is sort of to learn through reflection. Mm-hmm. So maybe talk about failure, culture, and maybe revisit that notion of like teamwork too. How do you reconcile failure with your partners and your employees and when you take a risk?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we started Sweetgreen as 3 21-year-old students that didn't know much about the business. But we had this vision for what we wanted to create. And again, we were creating it for ourselves, the customer. And so it led us to try a lot of things that didn't work, but it also led us to try a lot of things that did work and that shouldn't have worked. But and so early on, we wanted to create this culture of not just embracing failure, but celebrating it when it works and learning forward and learning fast. So again, you don't want to sit there just failing at everything all day, but those mistakes oftentimes yield the most valuable lessons and learnings. And then if you iterate quickly and learn forward fast, you then get to a much better place and oftentimes get to a point of success pretty quickly. So a lot of it is around just the culture of failure and adaptability and just moving and iterating fast. And I think of some of the greatest parts of our business today, and they started as, with these small ideas that then we tried and mostly failed, but there was like a glimmer of hope, and we said, well, let's double click on that part and forget. And over time, that iterative approach really allowed us to evolve our business quite a bit. Our business today looks so different than it did 15 years ago, from our menu to how our restaurants are built, to the technology, to the team member experience, to all the tools. It is a radically different business. There's only one bowl on our menu that was there even 6-7 years ago. So again, everything has evolved so much and changed, and that's because we spend a lot of time trying things, listening to our customer, and observing, and just trying to be students. We started as students of the industry, and we still try to have that mindset today. And so one of the biggest lessons we've learned is, as your team gets bigger. So today we have 350 people in our HQ and 5,000 people across the company. It's important to make sure you create that culture of entrepreneurship and embracing failure in the right places, right? Food safety, you don't want to embrace failure. But trying new things, whether it's on the menu or thinking about like technology and feature, there's all these places where we want to push innovation and make sure that people aren't afraid to fail. And oftentimes you say, if you're never failing, you're not trying hard enough, you're not pushing yourself hard enough, you're playing it too safe. And yes, you want to try to make the small and medium mistakes and avoid the really big ones, but that's kind of what we've learned over the years.
Wonderful. Tell us your name, please.
Yeah. Hi, Nick. My name's Katie. Thank you so much for sharing your story today. I just had a quick question. So you said that you started Sweetgreens in 2007, and that's kind of like in the midst of the financial recession. So I was wondering, you're talking about like cycles of failure. Was that a rough start? Could you explain a little bit more how that impacted you?
Yeah, great question. So yes, starting the business in 2007 and then 2008 was great for some reasons, but really challenging for others. So I think again we were at the beginning of this kind of food revolution of people really rediscovering food in a different way, and the conversation was changing. So I would call that some tailwinds on what we were doing and the idea. But raising money for 3 21-year-old kids that have no track record and had never started anything was pretty challenging in the beginning. And for the first couple restaurants, our business is very capital intensive. It requires raising a lot of capital. So in 2007, 2008, 2009, the gauntlet of raising money was really tough, and we would take money from anyone. Like we took money from anyone that would give it to us at the time, like small $5,000 checks, and our teachers and friends, someone I met on a plane once. Like we just, you do what you need to do. And so I would say that was probably the part that was the most challenging. Interestingly enough, the recession also created some other tailwinds for us. I think if you look at a lot of the behavior, especially around office lunch behavior, and how a lot of consumers would generally like go out to a sit-down 2-hour lunch, and I think that behavior kind of shifted. So people started to trade down to more affordable options, and we then presented this option that was the same quality as a fine dining restaurant in terms of ingredients, but a lower price point. So we saw this kind of trade down in a way, and we were acquiring customers that wanted a quicker, more convenient lunch, but also one that was probably more affordable. And the days of sitting down for a 2-hour office lunch on like a Tuesday for the average person spending $40-50, people had shifted away from that.
Katie, I love your focus on timing, because that's such an important consideration for entrepreneurs. And it's hard when you're like looking out at the world and reading the newspaper and seeing, is recession looming on the horizon, or interest rates going up? What does this mean? And I was in this sort of same headspace in 1990 when I was starting the Republic of Tea, and that was a recessionary year. And I remember asking my mentor, I wrote him a note, I said, when's the best time to start a business? And he wrote back, always and never. That was a conundrum. So, but Nick, did you came out of an entrepreneurship program, did you have any pressure like to become a French teacher or to become a lawyer or a doctor, or was the restaurant industry looked to be, a lower sort of achievement of your expectations around you? Like, how did you manage that? Because I think, you go to a fancy school, you get a degree, and you want to start a fast food restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question we got from a lot of people. And, to be honest, if thinking about the context we were in of a school like Georgetown 15 years ago, majority of people there became either bankers, consultants, foreign service, school of foreign service also. But there wasn't a lot of entrepreneurship. And actually, it wasn't an entrepreneurship major. There was just one class that an adjunct professor taught. But the three of us took it, and it really helped us think about how to write a business plan. But at the time, it was senior year. A lot of people try to start businesses, but quickly when those what do they call them, info sessions, when like Goldman Sachs shows up to campus, everyone puts on the suit and then they want the Goldman job. And I remember thinking like, that's not for me. And my two co-founders and I, all of us came from parents that were immigrants and entrepreneurs. So we grew up with this different context of, you can start something and run it and solve a problem yourself and work for yourself. And there's, that seemed the path that would provide more purpose for us. And then we had this problem we wanted to solve, so we did it. But a lot of people did give us the looks like, you're starting what? Oh, that sounds cute. Maybe you'll get a real job in a year. And then when they finally saw it, it was like 500, the three of us could barely fit in that thing. It was 500 square feet. And we even had a few teachers tell us to not do it. I remember actually a few teachers were like, go lose someone else's money. Don't go do this yourself. Funny enough, we ran into that teacher on an Amtrak train like 6 years later, and we were like, you told us not to start this. He tried to deny it. But it was a different time. And also, even you think about some of the innovation and R&D and investment in the food space, it was a different time back then. There wasn't as much investment in the space there. I remember even when we took our first institutional check from Steve Case at Revolution, the headlines were, "What is this technology investor doing investing in food?" It was like a weird concept in 2012 or 13. And so now that's pretty common. We see a lot of investment happening across the food and ag space, which is really exciting.
Great.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the Sweetgreen drive-thrus that I've seen that are coming out soon. I wanted to ask what inspired this idea and what you think it means for the future of food.
Yeah, great question. So again, like I've said, over 15 years, the Sweetgreen business, the experience, the model, the menu, everything has drastically evolved. And we see it continuing to evolve. And I think the world is changing quicker than ever. We see COVID kind of accelerated many trends in the industry and behavior a few years ahead. And so for us, as we think about scaling Sweetgreen and building restaurants in different communities and cities and neighborhoods around the country, for us, it's really understanding what is the best experience to bring that to life, to bring our food to life. And so, if you look at so much of the growth in the fast food space over the past 5 and 10 years, it's been driven primarily on highly convenient drive-thrus. When you look at even Starbucks and McDonald's, I think an insanely high percentage of their existing and definitely their new builds, I think it's like 70 to 80% of their focus on new development is on drive-thrus and pickup lanes. And so as we start to expand outside of just urban core of these big cities and start to really broaden where Sweetgreen is, we want to continue to evolve and broaden the experience. And when you think of so much of that customer that's in their car, whether with their family or on the way to work, and just creating that I would say that's one part of looking at an industry and then not reinventing it. I mean, for us, it's going to be a little challenging and different because of our high digital penetration. It's not a typical drive-through. It is a pickup lane. So basically, if you've ordered ahead, you can drive through and not get out of your car and pick it up out of a window. So similar, you've read with the Chipotle lanes that Chipotle is doing. So again, it removes even more friction between customers and being able to order and pick up their food without getting out of their car. So, we're excited to continue to evolve the physical format of our restaurant. And when we do that, we don't just think about the customer experience, we think equally about the team member experience. Because today, working the Sweetgreen is pretty hard for the team member. And I would say the hardest part of our job is not supply chain or tech or brand, it is people. We have 5,000 team members that show up every day and make our food from scratch. We don't have a commissary. We don't buy anything processed. We're making everything from scratch in the restaurants every day. And so that is like manual labor. It's hard. It's physically hard. So we're constantly thinking about how to optimize and evolve the team member experience as well, whether it's tools, of telling them how to use the oven better or how to prep all the ingredients in what order and how much. And so just trying to remove as much of the friction for the team member as well.
Great. Let's do this. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to use that clock up there, okay? So it says it's 3 minutes after 6, which can't possibly be correct, but we'll come back in 10 minutes, okay? During that 10 minutes, feel free to stretch, use the restroom, but more importantly, find a friend here and use that time to share the topic that you're going to do the paper. Then we're going to come back, and believe it or not, we have a special guest tonight. Larissa Zimberoff, who was here earlier in the semester to speak with you, is here tonight as a guest, and she's got a question for Nick. So when you come back from the break, we'll resume. So let's try that. Excellent. I like to say it takes 15 years. All right, welcome back. It seems like some of you enjoyed that interaction. So if you thought that was productive, could you raise your hand? If you would prefer not to do that, can you raise your hand? It's okay to, a couple of you. See me after class. we're just experimenting. We fail fast and we pivot here at Edible Ed. And so we're going to welcome more questions from Nick, and we have one from our guest, Larissa Zimberoff, the author, you remember, of Technically Food, and remember I shared her amazing article in The Atlantic. How'd that do?
Great. Lots of chatter about chocolate not made from cocoa. Although people are still confused, like how they're making it, right? A couple of the companies are making chocolate just out of different ingredients. So it just tastes like chocolate, but it's not chocolate. And then one company is actually using plant cell cultures to actually take cells from a cocoa plant and grow cacao plant and grow them in the lab.
What's the name of that one?
That's California cultured. And it's much easier to do plant cell culture than like mammalian cell culture, like the companies like Upside Foods that's trying to make it from animals, like cows and chickens, et cetera. By the way, Upside Foods, which is in Emeryville, just opened up. They have a sign-up list, and you can go on a tour of their factory. And they're doing that every few months. So for those that are interested in seeing a facility that might one day grow cultured meat.
And thanks to your introduction, Adam from Voyage Foods, which is making the chocolate, is going to come to class on the 13th.
And he'll probably have treats, so don't miss it.
Yeah, and then we have the founders of Wild Type, which is the company that is making salmon from cell culture.
Cell-based salmon, and I tried it today. Follow me on Instagram, technically.food, and you can see photos.
Okay, what's your question for Nick?
Okay, Nick, you bought a robotic salad company a few years ago, and I'm curious about integrating it and what the vision is and what you see down the road for this hybrid.
Yes, so we bought them 6 months ago, but we've known them for 5 years. So we bought our first major acquisition, a company called Spice, and it was 4 MIT engineers in Boston that basically looked at a brand and restaurant like Sweetgreen and said, how do we rethink the whole experience and labor model applying automation and robotics? And so they spent years building different versions of it, and there's many people trying to solve that today, bringing things to market, and we do believe that will be a part of the restaurant experience of the future. So we've stayed close to that and just understood what the different innovations have been happening out there. And Spice by far was the one that impressed us the most. And they had 2 restaurants live for a year in Boston. So proof of concept and almost no downtime. And most importantly, the product tasted really good out of it. And so even though it was robotics, it was still the experience they created around the what they call the Infinite Kitchen, which was the assembly robot, was still very a human-centered design approach. So versus some of the other, more automated experiences out there, like
what was the one that was here in San Francisco that they opened?
Who's been to Creator? It's a burger place that was in San Francisco.
What was the one with the?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the automat.
Itza.
Oh yeah.
So some like Itza, where Itza was. Yeah. So Itza that had opened, and then the concept was really like 0 humans, and it was a little colder and just a very different experience. And Spice was creating a very different, and you can go online and check out videos if you haven't heard of it or seen it, but really impressed with the founders, the technology, and just their approach. And so almost saw it as more of an acqui-hire. And so, for us, we're continuously optimizing that experience and the engine of Sweetgreen that we build. And so whether it's drive-through lanes or automated kitchens, we see a future where we want to rethink, not just the customer experience, but the team member experience. And, like we said, people is one of the most challenging parts of our business, and many of the positions in a Sweetgreen are really challenging. And so how do we think about removing more of the, and evolving more of the manual tasks in a restaurant, and then redeploying that labor and that capital to more customer-facing hospitality-driven moments in the restaurant.
So are those founders working for you now?
They are. We've kept the whole team, and they are doing brilliantly, and we're really excited by the work they're doing.
When will we see something?
I can't say.
When I was working with the Culinary Institute, one of the things we learned was that cutting broccoli is one of the most time-consuming, labor-intensive, aesthetically challenging processes, and that they did some research saying that if there was robotic equipment, that it would help get more broccoli into meals. So there's the challenge.
I'm
Hope they're
sure
working on
cauliflower
broccoli.
rice has helped us eat more cauliflower. So I do have another question, which is, as the 2 years of COVID, as you look at it as one snapshot of 2 years, what did you as a company learn of the opening and closing the stores, kind of having to be real nimble on evolving your rules, but also staffing and keeping people, retaining people, making sure they felt safe, and how did you navigate those things?
Yeah, great question. It has definitely been, in most ways, a very challenging 2 years for us, especially when COVID first hit, just like the whole industry and pretty much anyone. It really rocked our world and drastically affected our business. We were in a fortunate position that we had just raised a good amount of capital, so we had a really strong balance sheet. So we didn't go into crazy survival freak out mode. Are we going to make it out of this? We knew we had enough capital to sustain, what we thought at the time would be 6 months or a year. But so we quickly, we quickly went to how do we keep our team members safe and making them feel safe? How do we try to keep our restaurants open so we can keep serving healthy food to our customers? And then how do we really protect our farmers and our food partners? So one of the first things we did was actually, we overnight had to flip our restaurants and add screens and masks and all the protocols that tamper-proof stickers, and just rethink some of the fastest change management I've ever seen in our business. And so really give our team a lot of credit for how quickly they evolved that experience to keep our team members and customers safe. But one of the first things we did was actually called all of our distributors, when restaurants were all shutting, called our distributors and said, we will pay you faster, our net payment terms, we'll pay you faster if you guarantee that you'll pay our farmers. Just to make sure that we, a lot of our farmers, live month to month and they can't afford to not have distributors paying them. And so we said, we will keep buying from you and we'll pay you faster if you guarantee that you'll pay our farmers. Secondly, we had, I talked about this outpost operation. We had 1,000. So if any of you have ordered pickup at Sweetgreen, where you order ahead, you walk into the restaurant, pick up off the shelf. We basically take those shelves and just put them all over the city in office buildings, in gyms, in residential towers. So you can open your Sweetgreen app and order to, Haas Building Auditorium 4. And if you order by a cutoff time, it comes an hour later. So it's kind of like batch delivery, and it's free delivery. Because if 20 people in here order by 11 a.m., 20 bowls show up at noon for free, basically. So we had 1,000 of those live. So most of those were in office buildings, and overnight, offices shut down. So we quickly pivoted that whole team, that whole operation, and moved all those shelves to all the hospitals. So we then, during COVID, the first 6 months, served 450,000 meals for free, not to free delivery. The meals were free to 450 hospitals around the country, to all the frontline workers. So again, which was a great thing to do and made us feel really good and was the right thing to do, but it also allowed us to keep the engine on of buying food from our farmers, giving our team members hours, and so it allowed us to really kind of keep the engine running. And so those were kind of the first two things. But, I talked about adaptability. It was probably the moment in which we had to be the most adaptable in our whole history, just like, everyone really. But week to week, rules were changing, laws were changing, things were spiking. And so it was this kind of all hands on deck, crisis mode. And, even with my exec team, I feel like it wasn't until a month or two ago where we kind of said, okay, let's kind of get out of crisis mode now. And obviously always have our COVID protocols and programs in place, but how do we, stop thinking just 6 and 12 months out? And how do we really start spending more of our time thinking 3 to 5 years out?
How did you communicate with all those people so quickly?
Our team members?
Yeah. What do you guys use?
Yeah, a bunch of different methods. So our team members, we have every morning, every restaurant starts with what's called the Sweet Talk. So it's kind of a pre-shift meal. So a lot of communication has trickled down that way. And then we have a bunch of digital tools, some texting, some training modules. And so, but again, things were changing week to week. And so it was a lot of information flowing. And we created a lot of policies around, obviously making sure that we could protect our team members and their hours and their pay. And so if someone did get COVID, how we paid them to stay home and isolate. And so again, we were fortunate to have the balance sheet to make decisions like that and invest in our people. But our team members, we also spend a lot of time listening to our team members with a few different feedback forums. Obviously, qualitative and quantitative, but tools like one tool called Humu engagement surveys that we talk to our team members about and just understand how they're feeling, what they want, what they wish we do differently. And by far the biggest feedback around how we responded to COVID was they felt heard, they felt like we took care of them, and they at least felt like, all the solutions weren't just thrown at them. A lot of it was, co-created with them.
What's your retention rate for employees?
Again, during COVID, the data got really messy because obviously there was some furloughing and some people left the workforce. And so our turnover has been higher and the whole industry has been really high.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something we're focusing on now. And, whether it's our benefits package or our development opportunities around, developing leaders internally, it's a huge focus for us because it's, again, the hardest part of our job is people. And the faster they turn over, the harder the job gets.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Larissa. Up to you. Great
hi,
combo.
So I had a question regarding the difficulty you had scaling up your business. You've already covered a few of the issues you had. Are there any other problems that you came across while expanding your business?
Yes, I could talk for days about all the problems and failures and things we messed up. I would say one of the biggest lessons, the obvious one is always around people and the importance of who you hire and when you hire them. We made a lot of those lessons early on. Really early on defining, when it was the three of us in the very early beginning, it was kind of easy. But then as we started to grow and grow, it became so important to really define our values and culture and what were the principles we were hiring people against to make sure that we hired the right people. So very early on we did that, but then one of the biggest lessons we learned, I would say, in the next 10 years was around when you hire the right people and the sequencing of that and how you resource things the right way. So at one point we hired a bunch of people on our data team before we had a big enough tech team that could actually build the stuff that the data team could do. So a lot of this was just the power thoughtfully resourcing and sequencing. So we'll have a million right ideas, but doing them at the right time in the right order is where all the value comes from.
Great insight. How about you? Tell us your name, please.
Hi, my name is Jenny. So I've noticed that there's a lot of conversation in the food world about how restaurant meal sizes tend to encourage overeating and just general overconsumption of environmentally damaging foods like meat and cheese. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the process for deciding the portion sizes for Sweetgreen's bowls.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the core parts of our food ethos is around plants and vegetables being at the center of our plate, center of our bowl, if you want to say. So, when we sell a bowl of our food, the meal, it's predominantly vegetable. So I think there's portion size, but there's also, caloric density and nutritional density. So, we kind of look at all those things and, the most 75% of customers at Sweetgreen either modify or customize their bowl. So the idea is that customers can get exactly what they want, what fits their flavor preference, their dietary restrictions, and again, the base of it is, whole grains or vegetables. And so focusing on the nutrient density of it is really where a lot of our food ethos stems from. And then again, the quality of the sourcing. And, we talk about Barber, a lot of the flavor starts in the soil, but all the nutrient density also starts if you're buying the right products from the right farmers growing things in the right soil. So a lot of it is around that. And then so much of our, a meal at Sweetgreen, if you look at the average fast food P&L or meal, it's usually full of attachments and soda and all these things. And for us, it's basically like the full meal in the bowl. We have some other vegetables on the side now, but generally it's customers can create the option and portion that fits for them. But generally it's more focused on nutrient density and less on, and again, plants at the center of the plate.
Thank you for that question. There's a discipline now called choice architecture, which Google Food did a lot of work in, and Cornell as well. This is sort of a behavioral science around food that relates to the last question, that when people are in a situation like in a cafeteria where they can select their food, there's been a lot of work and study done around the size of the plate, so that the perception that you're getting something that's abundant, even though it might be a smaller portion, or the placement of the dessert in the old days, the dessert would be right there on the end of the counter, and it would just be, well, I got to put it on my tray. And then they figured out that if you put it all the way on the other side of the room and it requires a walk, it changed behavior. So I just think that's a very interesting example of like a cross-disciplinary area of study that is becoming important.
Yeah. And again, so much of our focus is on that nutrient density and the macros. And we have customers that say, your bowls are so big, I split it for 2 meals. We have some people say, like, I'm not full after I eat it. So there's obviously a range in like satiation and like need states from customers. But the thing that we've really focused on is just the quality of each ingredient and the input. So, there's nothing highly processed. We don't buy any sugars. There's no refined sugars in our restaurant at all. We don't even buy sugar. We use like very small amounts of local honey or local maple syrup to sweeten the dressings and beverages when they even are sweetened. And so the idea is that, whatever your portion size that fits your own personal consumption, the quality of those ingredients and the nutrient density is really high. One of the things we don't talk enough about at Sweetgreen, because we think it's kind of obvious, but one of the biggest differences between us and a typical fast food or fast casual model is we don't serve soda. And we don't have soda. And, typically when you look at, what that does to the margin, it's like if you actually do the even back of napkin math, it's a massive part of the P&L of the margin. And we've created an economic model that doesn't rely on soda. And yes, if I had sold soda over the last 15 years, I would have made so much money. Because people would buy it. If I had put Diet Coke on our menu for 15 years, it's scary to even add up how much money that would have been over 15 years that we could have made. But that's not why we started Sweetgreen. And ultimately, it forced us to think about different ways to serve our customer and give them options that make them feel good and that they want. And ultimately, it changes consumer behavior.
So that's really an example of your values in action. Did you ever get any pressure from an investor or a board member to say, hey, I want soda, and where's the soda?
Less so than you would think, but it was always a question we got. Our margins were always, at times decent and better than others, but it was obviously a question when you look at how much of your margin could come from selling, especially when it's the fountain soda. It's just pure profit.
Well, we still have an issue here, on the campuses that each of the university campuses of the University of California has a contract with a beverage provider that has the contract, and it's a little, they're hooked in. And there's a group that I participated in briefly to explore how to release that situation, but there's this reciprocal addiction of support that comes and supports different programs and big budgets. And so, but I put this on your radar because this is a great unmet need and a really interesting entrepreneurial opportunity. And I've watched companies like Airbnb. When I knew the head of food there, he actually created all the beverages from scratch at the Airbnb commissaries without any corporate influence, and he moved much more toward healthy sweeteners and things that work. So, Sydney, and then we'll come down here.
First of all, thank you so much for being here tonight. This group up here got some Sweetgreen before to honor you being here.
Thank you.
So you've identified many points tonight of the many. Some that stood out to me were people, friction, challenge, and ultimately success. And so of all those points, one of the missions of Sweetgreen is accessibility. And Sweetgreen has certainly been a pioneer in that in the fast food industry, although what is a huge difference in the fast food industry is that a McDonald's Big Mac is $5 and a Sweetgreen bowl is $15, and price points are certainly a discrepancy for accessibility. I've also had my time in food service. I did some time at Blue Hill as well and at Mezzo, so I've been on both sides of the situation where you have to, balance your books, but you also want to make sure that the food that you're selling can be available to people who are not just in the corporate realm as well. What actions is Sweetgreen doing to increase its accessibility in that manner, and how can you balance that while still respecting the work of your team and your farmers?
Great question, and so thank you for that question. I would say, ultimately I talk about building Sweetgreen to be generational, building it over 100 years. So for us, we believe that everyone deserves access to this type of food. So in terms of access, that is, we're playing the long game in the journey here. So as we think about evolving our product, the engine, the physical experience, how we build our restaurants, all that is evolving in the direction of being able to feed more people. So to increase our TAM, right? Be able to feed people that today don't have access to it, can't afford it, don't consider themselves eaters of this kind of food. So if you look at who our customer is today versus 5 years ago and definitely 15 years ago, it is radically different. And so, I would say there's a lot of things at play. It's a very complicated solution because it's not as easy as just saying, Sweetgreen, drop your prices, because then your business wouldn't work and then we wouldn't open anymore. So for us, the more scale we get, the more adoption we get of this type of food. It gives us more pricing power in both ways. What's really important to us is having entry points and a range in our pricing, so that someone that does want to come in and get, in pretty much every market, I think, except New York, you can come into Sweetgreen and get a bowl under $10. Again, is it loaded with 5 proteins and cheeses? No, but you can have a bowl that is nutrient dense for $10. It's really been interesting to see in the last couple of years some of the pricing changes in the whole industry. So even if you look at someone like Chipotle, their prices are a lot closer to ours than they used to be. And ultimately, for us, we believe in creating access to this type of food in a really sustainable way, in a way that makes sense for the customer, makes sense for our business. Over the years, we've watched a few brands put some of these versions of their concept in food deserts, which can almost come across as a marketing headline, and then they close them quietly 2 years later. And so when we do it and how we do it will be in a way that is sustainable, that can, serve all stakeholders involved, where we can pay our farmers the right, amount, our team members the right amount, and ultimately serve food to our customers at an amount that they can afford. And, again, when you talk about even our investment in spice, part of what's really exciting about that is it starts to reimagine the whole Sweetgreen experience and the economic model. So now as you think about your labor line looking very differently, it gives us the ability to pull a lot of different levers. I mean, what gets me really excited about something like spice is, less about it's less labor or it's a different labor model. It'll be a different labor model, but it removes pressure for me to spend less on my food, which is the pressure that you see that happens to all restaurant businesses as they scale, right? You have to create leverage in one of the cogs or labor. So it protects my ability to continue buying quality, if not higher quality food as we scale. And secondly, it gives us flexibility on price, right? So I think why we make investments like that and even things like Outposts. Today we have, I talked about Outposts. We are putting Outposts in places today in food deserts where it doesn't make sense to build a Sweetgreen yet. So we're starting to seed our product, seed demand. And so, we're on a mission to do this in a sustainable, thoughtful way that actually makes sense for all stakeholders. And we're not rushing to do it just to get a headline. But ultimately, we believe that everyone deserves access to this type of food.
Thank you. I wanted to do a quick term definition, because not everyone here is from the business school.
Yes.
So you used TAM, which means total addressable market.
Yes.
Earlier, you used the term acqui-hire, which is a term that's often used in the venture capital industry when you are buying a nascent team that hasn't necessarily brought their full product to market to scale, and you're really looking to hire the talent. Your focus is on the talent. Is that fair?
Yes.
And then you also use the term COGS, which is cost of goods sold. So that those are the ingredient costs and often the labor costs that go into the ingredients in that bowl that leads to the markup and the price, the retail price. So just a little decoding there.
Yeah.
Couple more
the
questions.
last thing I'll say on the accessibility piece is, when you start to really take a step back and you start to read a lot more on the true cost of food, true cost accounting. And, actually one of the stats we heard years ago that really inspired us was, I forget the exact time, but I think it's if you go back 50 years or something around that, if you look for every dollar of disposable income the average American spent on healthcare, they were spending $2 on food. Today it's flipped. Mm-hmm. So just when you start to make the correlation and you start to understand, how food connects to your health, ultimately there is some true cost accounting that is really hard to communicate and really hard for most people to make those connections, and even if they have the ability to even make those decisions.
And difficult to unseat the concentration of power in the industries that control those. I mean, is there a day when SNAP benefits might be available to use at a Sweetgreen? Or?
Yeah, these are all things that we get really excited about. I mean, when we look at traditional fast food and you think of, I remember being in our dorm room with John and Nate, my two co-founders, being like, we dream one day of having a pylon sign and a drive-through on a highway. We dream one day of being able to, sponsor athletes the way Coke and McDonald's do. And last year we did something like that. We actually partnered with Naomi Osaka, and to kind of change the paradigm on sports and food and sports marketing. And if you think about this next generation of athletes, they're not going to hold up those same products and beverages and, McDonald's at the Athletes Village and all those things. That is not what most of the athletes of the future are going to do. But those are the companies with the biggest budgets. So we get excited about getting to scale and being able to compete with, hopefully one day even a portion of companies like that to be able to, talk about food in a different way with people like that. Naomi Osaka holding up a Sweetgreen, does so much more to change how people connect with food and think about food than a lot that we can do. So it's really exciting to start to get to see the conversation start to shift there, and the future of some of the biggest personalities and athletes and platforms out there are really starting to connect with food in a different way, the same way they connect with all those other great brands.
And speaking of timing, that was amazing timing to be intersecting Naomi's
She's been a great partner. And again, we met Naomi because she was just eating Sweetgreen 4 days a week to fuel her training. So it's always nice to connect with people that authentically like the product.
Authentic connection. Hey, Pooja, why don't you come here, and then instead of asking your question, you can facilitate the final 10, 15 minutes of the class.
I have a question from a remote student.
Okay, I'll switch.
I'll come hang out. Yeah. I think we don't need to do that. Don't need to do that at all. Okay, cool. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Sure. Hi, Nick. My name's Josh, and I really appreciate you coming out, and I also really appreciate your dedication to farmers. I come from a farming family, agricultural background, so that means a lot to me. I'm one of the people who hasn't tried Sweetgreen, so maybe that might be a reason that I go to try Sweetgreen now. But shout out to Mezzo also. Mezzo's pretty good. My question is, since you went public so recently, you said this past November, that sort of broadens the base of people you're beholden to, not only now your customers and employees and farmers, but now also shareholders. Basically, do you see any sort of future conflicts of interests in between those groups of people that you now have to satisfy? And if any sort of ethical dilemmas might occur because of that, and how would you address those things if they do come up?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something we, my two co-founders and I and our whole exec team spent a lot of time thinking about before we made the decision to go public. Quite honestly, we could have gone public years ago, and we had a lot of pressure and people pushing us to go public earlier, and we really held off for a few reasons. A was making sure that, internally we were ready. We had the right systems and people and team and, and scalability. But also it was, for us, when we went public, it's also a platform to tell your story and really share the value prop of Sweetgreen and our vision and our mission. And everything I talk about supporting, next generation of fast food, but, changing the food system, changing agriculture, even our focus on soil health. All that is, and even if you read our S1, which is the document that your document you put out in the world to go public, that's what we talk about, and that's who we are, and that's why people come to us. And so we did that in a way to make sure that, we attract the right investors and that people are aligned with, they want to invest in a brand and a business and a product that believes in that and is doing that. And so I'm sure over the years ahead there will be pressure here and there. I mean, the best way to avoid that pressure is just to keep beating your earnings and doing well, because then you get less pressure. So that's plan A. But generally, we feel like we've been really strong around sharing our vision and mission and why we're building Sweetgreen and what Sweetgreen is. So if there would ever be pressure to serve soda or to change the way we source or work with farmers, it would deteriorate the whole value prop of Sweetgreen, because that's why we do what we do. So we're really conscious of telling that story and making sure that we share those values so that we attract people that are aligned with those values. And even, as we went on the roadshow, which is the week-long, you sit there for a week straight meeting like 100 different investors and funds and some of the biggest funds in the world. And, you can tell by their questions and even, their track record, what they believe in and what kind of businesses and companies they support. And we've been really fortunate to have shareholders and funds that really believe in that. So, and again, that can change over time, but generally we feel like if we keep telling our story the right way, that we'll attract the right investors.
This is a little in the weeds, but could you talk a little bit about the dual class share structure and how that kind of feeds into
Great question.
this piece of it?
Yes. So again, when you talk about control, obviously there's and this is all public in the S1, and so anyone can go read that. And so my co-founders and I have maintained a different class of shares that allow us to keep voting control for a certain amount of time. And again, it's exactly for reasons like that to make sure that over the next decade, we can make sure that we are continuing to make decisions that are in the best interest of all stakeholders, our farmers, our team members, our customers, and the business and our shareholders. And ultimately, we're big believers in conscious capitalism. That's how we've made decisions. So we want to continue being able to invest the right way, in the right time horizon, and really thinking sustainably. So having that dual class structure allows us to do that.
Yeah, and so just the high level view of that is that what you can buy as somebody that's an investor making your own decisions, that has one vote, whereas the shares that Nick and his team hold have 10 votes, even though they are priced the same, right? So they have like 10 times as much power when it comes to making decisions. So there's these ways that they're structuring their approach to going public that also allow them to have more long-term control. Do you want to go ahead? I think this is our last one for the night. So, yeah.
Oh, so much pressure.
Make it good.
Well, hey, Nick. My name's Andrew. I'm in the MBA program. Also a big Sweetgreen fan. Sad to see the root vegetables go. It's like my favorite thing. Just kind of maybe a little bit more of like a specific follow-up, especially in light of the conversation about going public and the pressures that brings. Has your team kind of thought like about, is there a ceiling to how much sort of the quality and responsible supply chain can support in terms of like opening a new store every day and moving into all these new geographies? Like, is that, like, where does that like start to become an issue, especially as you're going to face all the pressures of being a public company when you get to that point?
Yeah, another great question. Everyone has great questions tonight. These were, again, some of the very top questions that all the investors asked us too. Sorry? Yes, exactly. I would say our supply chain is definitely different than most fast food or fast casual restaurants. It's something that we're really proud of because not only is we think it's the right thing to do for the food system, but it's quite honestly, selfishly, it's what makes our product, I think, taste better, right? So we make these investments not just because we think it's, the future of agriculture and soil health and all, but it's also just makes our product really good. So it's kind of a selfish investment in our product. I will say early on when we kind of codified our food ethos at Sweetgreen, which is the kind of structure that defines how we source, how we prep, how we serve our food, we were very clear to make it broad enough to allow us to scale, but also bold enough to, create the change we want to see in the food system. And that was very intentional. So to give you an example, a lot of people come to Sweetgreen, and even though they see the list of all of our ingredients on the board, they're like, oh, well, Sweetgreen is 100% local. It's like, no, we're not 100% local. We have a heavy focus on regionality and seasonality, but if we were 100% local, it would be impossible to scale and actually, serve most things and sometimes the year in parts of the country, like the Northeast where we started, and California easier, obviously. But so for us, our food ethos is a lot more thoughtful, and it's less about, to kind of sum it up, it's less about exactly where something is grown and more how it's grown. Right, so for us, if something is 199 miles away, like versus 200, and like we don't care about that. Generally, we want to celebrate regionality, but in different food sheds, and celebrate the great makers and growers in those regions and tell their stories. And there's nothing I love more than having a name on our board that's the name that the farmer at your farmer's market. There's a beautiful connection, emotional connection there, and we have many of those. But ultimately, in our supply chain, we work with 200 growers, farmers, food partners that are all around the country, and it ranges from small, medium to some of the largest organic growers in the country. And so that's very intentional that we want to work with that range of growers, because as we get scale, we have the ability to change how they're growing, what they're growing, and ultimately how they treat the land. So, we have a big focus on transitioning acres right now. So going to conventional growers and being like, we want you to transition and we'll pay to organic growing. And so things like that, and with the kind of supply chain we're building, it just forces us to think a little further out. So, really thinking about the volume we need to buy and grow 3 years, 4 years, 5 years out, and making sure we have the right partner set up. Almost 40% of the growers we work with, we've worked with for over 3 years. We have some that we've worked with in DC where we started, where we now have 30 restaurants for 12, 13 years. So we're very intentional and thoughtful about how we set up these relationships to scale. And some of them can scale and some of them don't want to. And we're very thoughtful about how those relationships evolve. But generally, we have a much bigger supply chain team than the average restaurant. And we've spent years building this network in almost every region of the country. And the fact that we have that regionality gives us a little resilience and flexibility when things happen, like Mother Nature and weather and all the other variables. But it also gives us, it gives us a lot of flexibility as our menu evolves, right? To just evolve it around the soil. So when I talk about serving the sunchokes on the menu, again, that was because our farmers said they wanted to buy them. Last year we did a big 2019, we did a big collaboration with David Chang around kelp. And we sort of want an incredibly climate positive ingredient. We made a big commitment last year around being carbon neutral by 2027. So part of that is how we evolve our menu and our supply chain. And so celebrating more climate positive ingredients like that. And again, we took out a billboard in Times Square of David Chang holding up a pile of kelp. And it was one of the best selling bowls of the year, and it was really delicious. So again, really thinking about how we evolve our menu and make the right decisions there. But having to think about it really long term.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a delight. Let's give Nick another round.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to wrap up, we'll do everyone's favorite time of the evening, attendance. There we go. Okay, and while y'all are doing that, just a couple of reminders. So for next week, we have adjusted the homework schedule, so there aren't as many assignments due along the way, but what we ask in return is that you are working on your final paper and are thinking about the components that go towards that. So Will mentioned at the beginning of class next week, we'd like you to come in with a 30-second elevator pitch for your current version of your solution, and we'll ask you to partner up and share that with one another.
And we'll invite several of you on the spot to come up and do it for the whole class. How about that?
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, and then we have the reflection discussion boards, and just one clarification there. If you've done 7 of those already, then those are optional from here on out. If you haven't done 7, then keep going in terms of getting credit, but hopefully they're a place to reflect on some of the conversations that we're having. And then next week?
Next week.
Yes, so next week, slight change up to our original syllabus. But next week we have Joey from Chef, which is a really cool company based in the Bay that works with local, call them aunties, so like local women generally that are making food out of their homes or out of small scale commercial kitchens, and it's a way for them to share their food and culture and earn supplementary income. So thinking about the ways that companies and business models like this are helping empower people that may not otherwise have access to capital and the infrastructure of building their own restaurants. So we'll see you all next week.
Quick note for the graduate students, we're meeting in a different room tomorrow and we're starting at 9 o'clock sharp. So check out that email. And I brought you some more oranges tonight, both Naval and Valencia, so help yourself.